Thanks so much, Down. I knew when we asked Down to present, we'd get like compelling data, and wow, he sure did. So thanks again. I'm going to speak next about, if I can advance this, I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the work we've done at UC Davis. So this sort of presentation is framed as what we call socially accountable admissions, and kind of what roadmap, what have been the elements of our, if you will, transition or transformation at UC Davis. I want to thank, as was done earlier, the people who've helped us put this meeting on. It's an incredible team listed up here on the slide. There's our Center for a Diverse Healthcare Workforce, led by Dr. Fancher. Again, this kind of work takes a lot of effort, takes a village, takes a real team, and so we're very fortunate to have this team at UC Davis Health. The story I'm going to tell begins as illustrated on the slide up here. When I became involved in admissions as Associate Dean in 2005, about 10% of our students were from underrepresented groups, and that's in California, which is a majority-minority state. Last year, that percentage was about half. And so the question really is, how? And I think Dr. Boatwright already talked about why, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but I do think it is important to understand and have some talking points about why. If you think about like those program directors, the question was aimed at, you have to be able to defend what you're doing. I think in healthcare, it's pretty obvious, and Dowan showed some impressive data about why. I think for us, we tended to use the argument, if you will, the health equity argument, which is that both racial concordance improves care quality, but also that the populations that our institutions aim to serve are often better served by this group of individuals, non-white physicians in particular. I think any successful change effort there are many elements, right? But the most important one, and this is not just my view, is this work from John Cotter from the Harvard Business School, is that there has to be a sense of urgency. And as someone who is leading the change, if there is not a sense of urgency, your job is to create one. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the burning platform metaphor, which is a situation where you're confronted with a situation where there are no choices except to act, right? To jump in the water or to burn, in the fire. So this is the kind of thing that I think you have to do as a change agent. I think the other principle we used quite a bit at UC Davis is something called the Stockdale paradox, which was based on a story told by a Navy POW from Vietnam, James Stockdale, who had lived or had survived solitary confinement for 7 years. And people asked him when he got out, how did you do it? How did you get there? 7 years in solitary confinement. What he said was kind of an interesting, kind of paradoxical statement, which was that you can never lose faith that you're going to prevail in the end. I never doubted I would get out, right? Which you can never afford to lose. But with the discipline to actually confront your actual situation, no matter how brutal or how difficult that current situation is. In other words, don't delude yourself with something that's not true. That's what got me through. I know today facts have sort of a bad rap, but facts, right? Churchill in the war room said, facts, I want the facts. Facts are better than delusions or dreams, because I need to know what's going on if we're going to win this engagement. So let's start with some of those facts. I think Dowan has alluded to some of them. They're pretty sobering. This is the distribution of income in U.S. medical schools. This is a couple of years old, but it's not that different now. What you see here is that the gray bars here are the top 20th percentile. So the top quintile of income is over half of U.S. medical students. And if you look at the bottom part of this slide, right, the bottom 60% only represent a fifth of U.S. medical students. So again, there's a tremendous disparity and maldistribution of income and background amongst U.S. medical students. If you wanted to put it really simply, it's the wealthy kids mostly that go to medical school. Now, Secondly, and this is data that Dr. Talamantes put together a few years ago, has to do with who is in medical school and what's happened to the medical school representation over time. Again, it kind of depends on when you slice it, like down, at what point in time. But this is over the last 2 or so decades where medical schools have grown a lot. So look at, over a 50% increase. At the same time, the representation of groups that are underrepresented in medicine has fallen. And no matter how you count it, it's by 16 to 20%. So medical school does not reflect society. I think this is California data. I won't belabor it, but the bottom line is California is over here. It's a majority-minority state. Over 40% of the inhabitants are Latino, 6% are Black, about 1.2% are Native American. If you look at the demography of doctors in California, it's very different from that. Only 6% of the doctors are Latino, far less than 1% are Native. And again, the Black physicians are about half, so you give big degrees, big sort of severe underrepresentation, and a disconnect between who we're supposed to serve and the actual people bringing that service, the workforce. So I just said that. I think Dallin said all of this, so I won't belabor it. I think Dr. Talamantes is going to speak a little bit about community colleges, which are an incredibly important pool of talent. Yet medical schools really don't value them at all. In fact, if anyone, discriminate against students who've attended community college. So the bottom line here is that in terms of reflecting society, medicine is really losing, not winning. And that's even in the most diverse states, such as California, Texas, New York. So to me, that's the burning platform. Now, in terms of why it's like this, I think all of you in the room probably know that all these things are operating. It's difficult to change people's minds and hearts. Everyone seems to know exactly how to do admissions. Everyone's an expert except for the people involved, right, in the process. Like politics, parochialism is everywhere, almost from every segment. I think you're going to learn a lot about structural barriers and structural racism and inertia. A mission, the actual mission of institutions, the stated mission versus what they actually do, what actions they would take with respect to their communities. And then for where we are in California, by statute, we're prohibited from considering race in admissions. That's true in about 9 other states, but the number of states that have anti-affirmative action statutes is actually going to increase. It's very likely. So there's a lot, right? The political environment, I just said OMG there. So I think one way to reframe this is why we're at this meeting today. It's so exciting to have everybody here and, to talk about the social mission of medical education. This is, which is the contribution of a school's programs and its graduates to addressing society's needs, in particular health needs when we talk about medical schools or nursing schools, dental schools. When Fitz, Mullen, and actually I think Dr. Chen's in the room. I saw her earlier. Yeah, there she is. Did this amazing study in 2011, which looked at schools by a very different ranking system, which is the social mission score has to do with a composite score of physicians practicing in primary care, practicing in health profession shortage areas, or who are underrepresented in medicine. You can see that the highest rated schools by U.S. News as well as the NIH are actually in the bottom quartile, and the lowest, the highest rated by those other traditional measures are in the bottom quartile, and the highest rated schools in terms of social mission are actually historically Black colleges and universities. So, as well as public or community-based education institutions. The private, urban, and northeastern schools did worse. So again, this is kind of like what Dr. Talamantes just said. What we value, what we place our prestige in is not aligning with what we really need to be doing in terms of improving health in our society. So what we do with this information at UC Davis is we developed a new mission statement around admissions. And I put it up on the slide here. So it's to admit students who will, as physicians, address the diverse health workforce needs of the region. So that's California. Now, this is just the same data displayed again, shows you the difference between physicians who work in California and the population. It's very hard to accomplish this mission, right, when there's these differences and disparities. But that's really driven our work. You know, people who know me know I like baseball. I think this metaphor works well, which is that if you think about how we look at candidates for admission, there are a lot of lessons to be taken from this movie, right? Do you know this movie, Moneyball, right? So this is where the Oakland Athletics changed the way they looked at and recruited talent. Rather than using the traditional measures like home runs, they actually developed new measures to try to recruit talent that actually they could afford, because they had a really, like the 29th out of 30th lowest budget. So but the bottom line is medical schools are like this. If the goal is to improve health, right, we actually need to choose medical students differently. And so we tend to use the wrong metrics for achieving that goal. So if we want to win the game, I think you've got to change the metrics. And so at UC Davis, we developed a new metric, something called the Sed Score, which is, I'll tell you about now. So we derived this from 8 variables that are socioeconomic variables, all in the application. They're listed on the slide on the left. We validated this in a series of admissions cohorts, about 15,000 applicants across the University of California system. You can see, I'll just give you a couple examples. This means that the student qualified for the AMCAS fee waiver, which is a signal of financial need or distress. Now, when you look at these 8 variables and you slice the cohort into underrepresented groups and non, you can see that these variables are all overrepresented in the middle column in the URM applicants, all of them, as well as a lower than 3.4, lower than the old MCAT score of 26, metrics are overrepresented in that same group. So this is not surprising, perhaps. What we did with this is we loaded these, we basically wanted to say, well, what's the problem with admissions, right? What's the problem? What the problem is a lot of times people just get admitted based on MCAT GPA. So we thought, okay, we're going to do a simulation where we try to adjust those traditional metrics with our metric. And so what we did in this study was, if you look here, 22% of the applicants in California are URM. So that's the baseline, that's the applicant pool. If you would simply accept the top 5% based on GPA and MCAT, you will have 10.7% of your admitted class be URM. Now remember, California applicants are 22% URM. So there's a disparity of 11%. That's an unadjusted, we're just using pure GPA and MCAT. But if we put in our SED score, we adjust it one time, we can reduce that gap from 11% to 6%. If we do double adjustment, again, what we're doing is we're adjusting the GPA and MCAT for SED score, you can eliminate that disparity. What you also notice over here is the metrics of the classes that are admitted are not that different. Like, it's the same mean GPA, the same mean MCAT. However, the range of scores is wider. So again, I think this is a proof of concept study that shows that if you consider or adjust grades and traditional measures, you can reduce disparities between the population and your admitted medical school. This is how we use this. It's a continuous score from 0 to 99. The higher scores mean more disadvantage. So my children, for instance, would get a score of 0. But that score would be put wherever you see a GPA or an MCAT in our process, you see that score next to it. 0, 10, 20, 95, all throughout the process. And so I think the effect that this has is it's really changed the way people think about the candidates. And people think if it's a number, it must be important, right? No matter how much education you do on this idea, like Malcolm Gladwell, all these books about threshold, it doesn't matter. So for many years, I just tried to do education of the committee. That didn't work as well as putting a number in front of them. And so over time, I think it's really influenced the way committee members and faculty think about applicants. And it's nudged them, I believe, to become more holistic. Now, it's hard to define, right, holistic. But it does make them look at candidates differently, and it's made a huge difference for us. It's not perfect. It has limitations. All these variables are self-reported, except for the fee waiver. So just a couple comments. Besides admitting the right students, we have to think about how long it takes to create a healthcare professional. I mean, I'm just focusing on physicians here, but there's nursing professionals and other healthcare professionals just as important to the workforce. It's a long way, a long road. So besides changing how you look at the students that you admit, you got to also change what you do with them once they come into your system, if you will. So these are some of the things that I think need to be done. The main thing really is to create inclusive environments where the students can be exposed to experiences and people that lift them up, that value them, that support them. And that's no small feat, right? I think, and then role models, of which there are none for a lot of the students that Town was talking about. They're absent in academic medicine. So what we've done at UC Davis, the way we've done that is we've developed small programs within the school, pathway programs. About 30% of our students are in one of these pathways, and they're pathways aimed at community health. So they're called community health scholars. And we have 4 of them, actually 5 of them now. I put them on the slide. They each aim to serve a unique population of need. The first one was the Rural Prime Program developed in 2011. It addresses the maldistribution of physicians in California. But the others all, again, attend to a unique health need or population. The Central Valley agricultural worker population, urban underserved, the primary care shortage, and then finally we're adding something called Tribal Health Prime in 2022, which is funded by the state of California to produce more physicians to work with tribal and indigenous communities in our state. If you look at these programs, this is this year's, it's their pictures. They're very different from, if you will, the usual medical student in lots of ways. And what they do once they leave medical school is also very different. So these are the outcomes, this is some outcome data from the students who've been involved in these tracks. And you can see this is their residency choice. About half went into adult primary care, internal medicine, or family medicine. But the rest went into other specialties that are actually shortage specialties in our region. So all of these, emergency medicine, internal medicine, peds, OB/GYN, psychiatry, general surgery, again, these are all workforce shortage specialties in our region. About half work in an underserved area. These are more distal outcomes, so after residency, and then about a third work in a rural area, which is, again, much higher than the usual suspect, if you will. So just a summary slide here. What we've done is really a multi-pronged approach. It has to do with having a mission, articulating a mission, and then trying to live by it. It has to do with investment. We have tons of support, external support, to support financially needy students. About 38% of our students qualify for the AMCAS fee waiver. The national number is about 12%. So, it's a very different group of students. I think you have to look at students differently. We talked about that. The one thing I'll mention is the purple here. Multiple many interviews are something we've done for a long time at UC Davis. The reason we like them is they incorporate many diverse perspectives into the interview. So 9 different people interact with each candidate. 1, 2, they are blinded to the scores, the MCAT, all that, whether they went to Harvard or Cal State Fullerton, or none of that they see. So it's designed to reduce bias and to improve, I think, the incorporation of diverse perspectives into that process. We also have data that scores on this. This is a study we did across California. Scores on the MMI are better predictors of clerkship, which is third-year medical school performance, than traditional interviews. Lastly, I'd say meetings like this, disseminating the work we've done and getting other people excited about it has actually brought more enthusiasm for the work at UC Davis. So, I think actually it's sort of a self-fulfilling cycle, and it's like it gains momentum. And I think the students, I would say I can't overemphasize the importance of our students, because they are also driven by this mission. And then they become part of it, and they're like ambassadors. So it grows with their leadership, which, again, something you don't think about. It's hard to measure, hugely important. So this is just the same data redisplayed, but sort of with all the different steps that I've described along the way. So it's a long road with lots of different steps, lots of different people involved, lots of people that deserve credit. Does anyone know this movie? Anybody? This is at the end of the Shawshank Redemption, where it's the hammer. You could see Morgan Freeman looking through that big hole in the tunnel. And it just reminds me that it takes a long time with the small hammer, lots of different chipping away is what it takes. And I think that that's the kind of, when you think about this, there's definitely a method, but it's a long game. And it takes, it's something that you've got to stick to. Anyway, thanks very much for your attention. I don't know, Ara, where's Ara? I'm looking at my timer. I don't have my watch. There she is. Am I over or under?
A little over, but you can take questions.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, man.
So, pretty remarkable numbers for UC Davis. How does UC Davis compare to the other universities of California?
The question was, how does UC Davis compare to other UC schools in terms of the composition, or do you mean in other ways?
Arriving at that 50% goal that
Yeah.
you did in a relatively short time.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing as well, are they interested in?
Is 15 years short? Wow. No. So, yeah, we're, in terms of the proportion of students from underrepresented backgrounds, we're the highest. In terms of the absolute number, some of the other schools, UCSF in particular, has higher absolute numbers. But the proportion, which is what we kind of look at, representation, kind of the other effects, the percentage is higher. But I'm going to tell you, I shouldn't say this in public, but I should say this in public. We accept students with lower grades, lower MCATs, all the things that we just, if you want to do this, you're going to have to change what you do and how you do it. So, yeah. Okay, Maggie. Well, you're going to have my slides. You can all have my slides. You don't have to worry about that.
Can you say a little bit more about the SEE? And so that could be viewed as an adjustment,
Mhm.
and quantify it.
Yeah.
Where I am, which is in the dental school, there's a lot of interest in predictor analysis.
Yeah.
Has there been have you seen any trends associated with that? Because sometimes I have some people on my admissions committee who say, just because their mission aligned,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they're going to be able to be successful in dental school.
Yeah.
And I love that diversity of opinion, because that gives us lots of opportunities to interact
Sure. So I think the question has to do with, is there evidence that these students that you choose based on socioeconomic adversity, if you will, are they successful in medical school? I think the way you ask the question is kind of interesting to me, because to me, the question about are they successful in medical school is not the question. That's again, going back to Moneyball. What do we really want? We want them to actually go, if we want them to actually go into the workforce and solve the problems that we're talking about, I think it's a longer term outcome. And I think sometimes we quibble over if a student takes 5 years, okay, to go through, I don't know, dental school, I forget, is it 3 or 4? It's 4 years. So if a student takes 5 years to go through dental school, but yet goes and works in a community, does community dentistry, like, is that really a failure? I wonder, right? I mean, so I think, because that's really, to me, always the arguments are about, well, look at their grades, look at the step 1 scores, look at all the stuff that's happening in medical school. And that's definitely what you're going to run into if you do this. So you have to reframe that discussion into what's really the goal. That's the Moneyball discussion. What really do we want to happen? Now, of course, you can't have people fail out. But I think there's a lot you can do to support them and keep them in. But it takes an it's much easier to just let rich kids go to medical school. It's a lot easier. And in dental school, I think it's even, when I think about dentistry, probably it's more stark, I think, sometimes. That's what I understand, actually, from our colleagues in California. Okay. I don't know. All right, I got it. There you are. No more questions, right? Or more questions? No more. Yeah, talk to me after. Talk to me after. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Efrain Talamantes, who is going to speak to you next. So I don't even need to introduce him, and he already gets the props. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the AltaMed Consortium of Community Health Centers, and actually a graduate of UCLA and UC Davis. So I'm proud to be part of his training back in ancient history. So welcome.